There's nothing as permanent as temporary protected status. Temporary protected status, or TPS, is sometimes given to illegal immigrants who are here when some kind of natural disaster or civil war happens in their home countries. As the name suggests, it's a stopgap, short-term amnesty, giving work permits to people to tide them over because we can't send them home right away. But even though temporary protected status is usually given for 18 months, what happens is it's renewed over and over again. The Congressional Research Service estimates there are something like 400,000 people with TPS now, not counting the Venezuelans, illegal immigrants who were just granted TPS by the Biden administration. Of those 400,000 people, most are Central American, and most have been here for at least 20 years, sometimes more, rendering the T in TPS something of a bad joke. The Trump administration actually tried to not renew TPS for illegal immigrants from several countries and was stopped by the courts. There's a proposal now in Congress to upgrade the people with TPS from what you might call amnesty light, which is what they have now, to amnesty premium, which is to say not just work permits, but green cards allowing them to become citizens eventually. That's part of the American Dream and Promise Act, which is a piece of the big Biden-Menendez amnesty bill, but a piece that has been pulled out and will be considered on its own as a standalone bill. Now, it may seem kind of crazy to be voting on an amnesty in the midst of a border crisis, but at least the concept of upgrading people to regular immigrant status, whom we've allowed to live here for years under this so-called temporary status, does have some merit. But it can't even be considered unless we fix the problem that made it possible for people to live here supposedly temporarily, but for potentially half a lifetime. One way to address that would be to allow the executive branch to give TPS, but only once, and that any renewals would have to be passed by Congress. That would make it much harder to put TPS on autopilot to be renewed over and over again without anybody really noticing. But the simplest solution, get rid of TPS, repeal that law. After all, if the concern is that it's impractical to deport people to a country because of a civil war or a natural disaster of some kind, ICE can, and in fact has, just pause deportations and then can check back in a few weeks to see if it's practical to resume deportations. The reason for the TPS law, though, the real reason, is to give work permits to illegal immigrants, to allow them to put down roots and make it harder for them ever to be sent home. So the real solution here is to get rid of TPS altogether and not allow some future administration to give what they call a temporary amnesty, but what really turns into a permanent amnesty.